James Carter sat at the kitchen table, a table that had seen its fair share of bills, but very few breakfasts. And let me tell you, this morning wasn't shaping up to be any better. The sunlight crept through the blinds, reluctant, casting long shadows over a pile of paperwork that seemed more like a monument to frustration than anything useful. At 42, James was supposed to be one of those men who'd made it. You know the type, the ones who walk into a room and immediately command attention, not because people want to, but because they have no choice. But life doesn't care about your plans, your titles, or how hard you've worked. It has this nasty habit of tossing bricks in your face, just when you think you've got everything figured out. James stared at the mountain of papers in front of him, each one taunting him with fine print and bureaucratic nonsense. It wasn't that he couldn't understand them. He probably could recite the details of a financial statement in his sleep. But today it all felt heavier, more personal. Maybe it was the pressure of running a massive company. Or maybe it was the nagging thought that no matter how high he climbed, the world always had a way of reminding him of where he came from. And where was that, you ask? Southside Chicago, baby. The kind of place where dreams either grow teeth or get eaten alive. James wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Hell, there wasn't even a plastic one. His father worked double shifts at a steel mill, day in and day out, until the day he was fired for daring to speak up about unsafe working conditions. "You've got to be 10 times better than them," his father used to say. Those words seared into James's brain like a brand. Not twice, 10 times, because they'll never let you forget who you are. James took that advice to heart. He clawed his way out of that tough neighborhood, through scholarships, internships, and endless late nights. He built himself into a man people couldn't ignore. But here he was, 20 years later, staring at that pile of papers like it was some cruel reminder that no matter how far you go, life always finds a way to drag you back down. But James wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. He had a plan. You see, James had a habit. Every now and then, he'd go undercover. No suit, no tie, no chauffeur waiting to take him from one meeting to the next. Just James in a beat-up leather jacket and jeans that looked like they hadn't seen the inside of a washing machine in weeks. It was his way of staying grounded, of seeing the world the way most people did. Unvarnished and raw. Today, he decided to visit one of the branches of his own bank. Not for a big meeting, not to shake hands and give speeches. No, today he was there to see how things ran when nobody knew who he was. He picked a branch downtown, a place that looked polished on the outside but had a reputation for treating its customers less than fairly. James had heard whispers, complaints about long wait times, rude staff, and in more than one case, outright discrimination. It was something he couldn't ignore. He grabbed his wallet, his keys, and a baseball cap that had seen better days and headed out the door. He wasn't expecting much, maybe a few raised eyebrows, perhaps some impatience from the staff. But what he walked into, that was a whole different story. When James stepped into the bank, the air hit him like a wall. You know that feeling, right? When you walk into a room and suddenly, everyone pretends you don't exist. Yeah, that's what it felt like. The space was sleek, marble floors, shiny counters, but it felt colder than a morgue. A few customers were scattered around, either waiting in line or filling out forms. The staff, mostly white, barely glanced up as he entered. James made his way to the counter, keeping his head low. He wasn't there to cause a scene, just to observe. The guy behind the counter, probably in his mid-30s, with a face that screamed, "I peaked in high school," gave him a once-over that lasted just a little too long. His name tag read Mike. And James could already tell he was going to be a problem. "Can I help you?" Mike asked, his tone thick with the kind of disinterest that told James this guy didn't want to be bothered. "Yes," James replied, his voice even, steady. "I'd like to withdraw $5,000 from my account." Mike raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly, as if James had just asked to borrow his car. "Do you have ID?" James pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license along with his bank card. Mike took them with deliberate slowness, making James's teeth clench. "What's the account number?" Mike asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. James gave it to him. Mike typed it in slowly, like molasses moving through the screen. After what felt like an eternity, Mike frowned. Yeah, we can't do that, Mike said, sliding the cards back across the counter. James blinked. Excuse me? We don't have that kind of cash on hand, Mike replied with a shrug. You'd need to put in a request, and even then, we have to verify certain things. Certain things? James repeated, his voice dangerously calm. Mike smirked. It was the kind of smirk that made you want to punch someone in the teeth. Like whether the funds are legitimate. For a moment, James just stared at him. The words hung in the air, thick like a bad smell. Legitimate. That one word hit him harder than any insult ever could. He felt the weight of every barrier he'd ever had to break through, every indignity he'd swallowed just to get to where he was. And here he was again, being treated like a supervisor. James took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to let Mike see just how much he'd gotten under his skin. Not yet. Well, James said, leaning slightly closer to the counter, how about you check again? Mike sighed, his dramatics almost comical, like James had just asked him to perform heart surgery. Look, sir, he began, dragging out the last word like it was an insult. Even if we had the cash, which we don't, you'd need to provide additional documentation. To prove you're not, James's jaw tightened. No, he replied slowly, keeping his voice dangerously calm. I don't know. Why don't you explain it to me? Mike hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Let's just say we have policies. Got to make sure everything checks out, you understand? James understood perfectly. And in that moment, he made a decision. This wasn't going to end here. James stood there, his patience thinning faster than the smirk on Mike's face. The guy had the kind of attitude that made you wonder how he hadn't been punched yet. Mike's last remark, laced with suspicion, echoed in James's mind. We have policies, you understand? Yeah, James said, his voice sharp with growing anger. I understand. I understand that I'm about to lose my cool. I asked for my money, James added, his tone now cutting. Not an interrogation. A few customers glanced over, sensing the shift in the air, but Mike? Oh no, he wasn't done. Mike leaned back against his chair, folding his arms like he was preparing for a lecture. Look, he began, his voice dripping with fake patience, it's not personal. We just need to make sure everything checks out. Some people, they try to game the system. James let those words hang in the air for a moment, the rage bubbling up inside him. It wasn't new. It was the same old anger he'd carried since his days in Southside Chicago. The kind of anger that comes from being constantly underestimated, constantly judged, and now, once again, being treated like he didn't belong. Let me get this straight, James said, leaning forward just enough to make Mike flinch. You're accusing me of trying to steal my own money? Mike shrugged, the smirk returning. Hey, I didn't say that. But, people like... James cut him off, his voice low and icy. People like me? Go on. Finish the sentence. Mike hesitated, clearly realizing he had stepped into dangerous territory. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. All I'm saying is we've got rules, Mike said, his voice now taking on a condescending edge. And people like you? They don't always fit the profile. The room went silent. A middle-aged woman in line gasped, her hand flying to her chest like she'd just witnessed a car crash. Another customer, a younger guy, muttered, "Damn, dude," under his breath. James could feel the weight of their stares, but he wasn't here for their sympathy. He was here for a point, and for his money. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to smile. All right, Mike, he said, his voice calm but laced with danger. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to process my withdrawal right now. Or I'll make a call, and we'll see how your policies hold up when corporate gets involved. Mike's face twitched for a second, the smug confidence faltering. But then, as if deciding to die on this hill, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Call whoever you want, he sneered, but I don't care if you have the Pope's phone number. Without the right documentation, you're not getting a cent. James blinked, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. Then he laughed. A sharp, humorless sound that made Mike shift uncomfortably in his seat. Okay, James said, straightening up. You've made your point. Let's see how far this goes. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the curious glances from the growing crowd of customers. His fingers flew across the screen, typing with a sense of purpose. Mike shifted uneasily in his seat. You really calling someone? He asked, his voice suddenly less sure. Oh, I'm calling, James replied, a wicked grin spreading across his face. But don't worry, it's not the Pope. The tension in the room thickened, the silence almost palpable. James waited for the line to connect. This was no longer about $5,000. This was about something much bigger, something Mike had no idea about. The phone rang once.
Twice.
Then it picked up. Get me the regional manager, James said into the receiver, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Mike's smirk faltered as he watched James speak, the realization creeping in that this wasn't just some random guy looking for a fight. James paced slowly, his tone calm but laced with the kind of authority that made people listen. The other customers in the bank were now openly watching, their whispered conversations filling the air. Who is this guy? One murmured. He's not messing around. Did you hear how he said manager, like he owns the place? Mike, meanwhile, was sweating through his button-up shirt. He glanced nervously at his coworkers, but none of them dared to intervene. One woman, clearly uncomfortable, muttered something about taking a break and disappeared into the back room. James ended the call, his expression unreadable. He slid his phone into his pocket and turned back to Mike. Now, he said, his voice as smooth as silk, you're going to check my account again. And this time, you're going to do it properly. Mike's hands hovered over the keyboard. His arrogance had been replaced by visible unease. His fingers trembled just enough for James to notice. He typed in the account number again, and this time, the screen lit up. Mike's eyes flickered with panic. Sir, he stammered, there seems to be a note on your account. I just need to check with